what I'm trying to figure out is what we can do more, because the whole conversation with the destiny and sexual assault is, I agree that there's an extent where we're kind of infantilizing women, by not putting the
Mhm.
onus on them of like speaking up about certain things, right? With being careful of like there's no interest, right? It's unfortunate that like even in the debate or talking later with Katie, you had to be clear, being like, just so it's clear, being a perpetrator is still bad. Like, no one's saying it's not bad. And if you're the victim of that, that's still fucking terrible. Now,
Yeah.
can we move on now to like the next parts about like how do we increase safety for women and stuff like that? And I feel like that's a really lacking conversation. Part of when I think about this discourse, and one thing I really struggled with when like teaching women boundaries, and something I personally had to get over, like in a even like a clinical setting, was like just couldn't understand not being willing to just call things out, right? Like I was just like, what do you
Mhm.
mean? Like if you don't like it, just say it. And they're like I don't know how, right? And so I actually engaged in like very practical boundary setting role play practice with my group, where I would literally sit them down with scripts. I'd have them prep the boundary beforehand. They'd read it out and they could barely state the boundary of a like literally a fictional scenario with a boundary they'd pre-written. They felt weird even saying that, and it made me have this holy shit moment of being like, holy shit, I'm actually occupying from a very like unique space of privilege in that like my personality is so disagreeable that like I don't need all this extra
I
support.
just feel like I'm erased as a person because I need to be some sort of like coddly, bubbly woman like everyone else. And if I'm not that way, like I'm the wrong kind of woman. I'm the wrong kind of advocate. I'm not who people want to hear from. And then in those circles, they just like reinforce that. I don't want to correct myself for them.
People recommended we chat. Um, and I was like, why? And they're like, Cherry's really down to earth and chill and reasonable. And I was like, okay, fair enough. Not a good starting place for knowing what to talk about. So I spent a bit of
Yeah,
time
that's
going through some of your content to kind of figure out what we could chat
oh
about.
shit. What parts of my content have you stumbled on?
So I watched the Prime K's live debate with you and Destiny, the big one.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
Okay, the
Um,
reasonable content. Good.
so I listened to that debate, which was really interesting. And then I watched you talk with Katie afterwards as well on YouTube. And
Mhm.
then I also watched you and Mr. Girl chat.
Oh, okay. So you've seen me just have real conversations, not yelling at my chat that I'm gonna fuck their dads.
No, I have not seen you yelling at your chat that you fuck dads.
I promise you, of everything that you've watched, the reason that people told you to talk to me is because of the last part.
What I think what would be interesting to maybe talk about is I'm curious about, obviously there's lots of discussion about consent and sex. I'm really passionate about like showing that women on the internet can have reasonable takes on things and be like moderate, um, and have like adult
Okay.
conversations about adult topics. And I sometimes feel like there is a lacking of people in the space doing that. Not because I don't think women are capable of it. I think it's just, I'm not sure if the algorithm doesn't cater to it or what exactly is going on, but I would like to see more. And I was interested in your content because it seems like you're somebody who's like willing to really like engage and talk about certain ideas. And so I'm kind of curious about just your thoughts overall with, um, like what are your views fundamentally on like sexuality and consent? Like what do you view as like gold standard? What is the responsibility of which partner? Which I know are pretty broad questions, but I'd be just curious because I couldn't quantify your opinion down to one thing based on those couple of videos.
I would say it's a team effort. I think it's really hard to put the onus on one person. And I think you almost have to, when you're engaging or preparing for, you almost have to like put yourself in the other person's shoes and think about like, okay, how can I meet this individual person? Like I think because I engage in like casual sex and I'm in an open relationship, I kind of take every person individually and I don't just I don't have like a set game plan for every encounter,
Mhm.
if that makes sense.
Yeah. Do you think that what I'm trying to figure out is what we can do more, because the whole conversation with the destiny and sexual assault is, I agree that there's an extent where we're kind of infantilizing women, by not putting the
Mhm.
onus on them of like speaking up about certain things, right? With being careful, like there's no interest, right? It's unfortunate that like even in the debate or talking later with Katie, you had to be clear, being like, just so it's clear, being a perpetrator is still bad. Like no one's saying it's not bad. And if you're the victim of that, that's still fucking terrible. Now,
Yeah.
can we move on now to like the next parts about like how do we increase safety for women and stuff like that? And I feel like that's a really lacking conversation. Um, because obviously we can say don't rape to men, but we've been saying that
Mhm.
for a long time, and it doesn't seem sufficient advice.
Yeah, I agree, and it doesn't it also doesn't seem like we're ever allowed to move past that. It kind of seems like that's where everybody would like us to sit and swim.
Mm.
Just tread water right here,
Yeah,
where it's not her fault. The He is the rapist and this is bad. And then we just move on.
yeah,
It's like it's as empty and as like brain dead of a take with no form of resolution and like no standard for like reality as just saying Hitler is evil.
right.
Like, oh, okay. So evil, it almost feels like there was um no possible intervention that could have happened there, and that no one else could ever find themselves in that identical position unless they themselves were evil. And like, what do you even consider evil? Just it feels like such a dead way to talk about a conversation, to talk about anything.
Mm. Why why do you think that is? Because my only experience in talking to people about sex and sexuality is very much been in like a clinician client relationship, right? Where
Hmm.
I've worked with women from addiction, and unsurprisingly lots of women with addiction also have a lot of sexual assault traumas. And they also get into
Hmm.
really terrible relationships with men that are often highly abusive. And so I've had like really nuanced conversations about like how do we break this pattern, right? There's a reason why these men who tend to be victimizing women often are selecting you for some reason. And it's not because you're at fault for it. It's saying, what's going on that you're falling prey to this pattern of relationship over and over and over? And how do we evaluate it to keep you safe, right? Because my goal with my female clients is I don't want them to get raped or get into abusive relationships again. So we got to figure out with them
Hmm.
how to protect them.
I feel like when it comes to the conversation um and like women who don't want us to get past the point of giving advice to women,
Mm.
they just want to like sit in the men rapist bad. I feel like that's just someone who hasn't gotten past it because you can't possibly uh, engage with that topic on the other side if you haven't like come there yourself, if you haven't like seen the light at the end of the tunnel and really gotten out of that like victimhood.
Mm.
Especially when you're so rewarded for it online. Uh, I don't really know what to do for those people because I was forced rock bottom, so I don't even know what it looks like to for someone to like gently hit rock bottom, um, or even to bounce back without having to hit rock bottom. I don't know what that looks like. I
So
almost feel
just
unrelated.
Yeah, sorry, just to clarify, when you're saying rock
Mhm.
bottom, are you meaning, because you kind of talked about like you transition from like victimhood and stuff like that. When you're talking about rock bottom, what does that mean to you?
That means being put in a situation where I'm forced to move past.
Mm. And like grow and overcome it essentially.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. And when you say move past, do you mean like for you personally moving past an experience of like being in that space of like victim and stuff like that and kind of how to how to basically create life after that for yourself?
Yeah, exactly. I think we understand if you are in, oh, I think you said it before too. If you've been in an abusive relationship, it tends to be a cycle. It tends to be one that you can't break. I used to call it my brain was like wired for chaos, and
Mm.
I would almost miss it if I didn't have it for a while. And it would self-destruct a lot of healthy relationships I tried to put myself in. You almost have to like learn to take life without the ups and downs. And I feel like that's difficult. I don't know.
What does that mean to you? Take life without the ups and downs.
Like everything doesn't need to be exciting. Everything doesn't need to be on 10 all of the time.
Mm,
And um, feeling peaceful can sometimes be really discomforting, if that makes sense.
yeah.
Um, Being loved can sometimes feel really uncomfortable. It can almost feel like it's gonna come with something at any moment. Uh, and I like that angst, that anxiety. I think it's is really hard to turn off and to get past, and it can make you look at everything like like red.
Okay, yeah, I think I'm understanding. Um, so then what role in situations where like women are in relationships where they're feeling uncomfortable? So let's use the simple casual sexual relationship and they start feeling uncomfortable. Um, like what do you personally at least what do you do to like navigate those situations?
If I feel uncomfortable,
Yeah, there's something maybe you've had an implied boundary, maybe you haven't explicitly because I think a lot of issues come up with like sometimes you
hmm
imply boundaries and sometimes we explicitly state boundaries. And I think the response we need to have to crossing implied boundaries versus explicit boundaries probably needs to be a little bit different, right?
yeah, probably. If you know that you've told somebody that you don't like something, then they do it. That's like it's really
Abject
set and
violation.
clear.
Yeah.
Yeah. Something that you haven't said before, you just like obviously you meet that with understanding. I didn't specifically say this, but I think for someone who has been traumatized or can easily be triggered, that can almost set them off in the same way as if somebody like violates something they specifically said. And I think it takes a lot of I don't know, just realizing yourself and being super forgiving for yourself for not being clear about that.
Yeah. I mean, there's certain implied things that I think are like somewhat assumed. So like this branched in part, this whole drama on Twitter branched out of a stealthing situation, right? Which I would say stealthing is
Mhm.
a pretty implied boundary. I don't think anyone thinks it's okay. Like the reason why the guy is even stealthing is probably because he knows that it's not okay and he's trying to sneak something, right? Um,
Yeah.
so obviously there's implied boundaries of being like, there's certain things I just don't like and I haven't voiced it. And then there's certain things that are like socially implied of being like, hey, pretty obviously, don't do fucking shitty things like stealthing. So how do you recommend somebody navigating that situation?
This is also my issue with the whole discourse. The When it comes to stealthing, like the damage is done, the sexual intercourse is over, and the threat is already there, and it's like the threat of maybe STI, maybe pregnancy. You're not like physically under threat of like a gun or like a weapon or something or like violence. Unless you consider like disease a violence against your body, like we can go super literal in that regard. But I don't find that to be something that you shouldn't be able to just turn around and be like, "What the fuck?" I I I can't imagine choking up in that way. Um, and I would just my instant like takeaway of somebody who would choke up in that way is like, "Oh, you're traumatized from probably something beforehand. This is an irrational response to somebody not having a condom on after a sexual engagement that you were okay with, and ideally you would, I don't know, sit with that and really figure out why you can't just tell someone that you're disappointed or that you are displeased or that you are furious that they took a condom off like after the fact. The threat is gone or I don't even know if it existed.
Would you say that you are a person who's always been really good at like stating your needs, wants, been like decently disagreeable, willing to disagree with like teachers or get like upset with people, kind of call people out really directly?
Yes. I've always been that person.
Yeah.
I have not always been the person who after asserting that would walk away when it wasn't respected.
The
So
follow through.
very vocal about what I liked, what I don't like, and then took a long time to uh walk away from people who would disregard that.
Okay.
despite me being very combative,
Yeah.
argumentative.
Yeah, interesting. So I'm kind of similar to you in that like I'm decently disagreeable in that like if somebody does something that I dislike, I'm pretty quick to address it almost immediately. Um, it's just
Hmm.
a habit that I've definitely like grown into. Um, and I've also been always pretty solid at the follow through as well, actually. I think I'm just kind of like I don't know if I'm like selfish in that way or something, but like I'm just like very pissy, I think, in that way where it's like if I say something and then you keep crossing it, I'm like, okay, bye. But I
Oh, see,
realized, sorry, go ahead.
that that part was the hard part. It's like saying bye. Um, it feels really comfortable to disagree with somebody for me. Uh, and it afterwards, it's almost like I'm waiting for them to give me a reason to not be upset anymore, which makes it very easy to manipulate.
Yeah, that's interesting. So part of when I think about this discourse, and one thing I really struggled with when like teaching women boundaries, and something I personally had to get over, like in a even like a clinical setting, was like just couldn't understand not being willing to just call things out, right? Like I was just like, what do you
Hmm.
mean? Like if you don't like it, just say it. And they're like I don't know how, right? And so I actually engaged in like very practical boundary setting role play practice with my group. I had about 10 women in the house, where I would literally sit them down with scripts. I'd have them prep the boundary beforehand. They'd read it out, and they could barely state the boundary of like literally a fictional scenario with a boundary they'd pre-written. They felt weird even saying that, and it made me have this holy shit moment of being like, holy shit. I'm actually occupying from a very like unique space of privilege in that like my personality is so disagreeable that like I don't need all this extra. I don't need the script. I don't need,
Hmm.
like that's never been an issue. Whereas I'm working with women of being like, oh gosh, like I probably need to figure out how to have this like how do you have accountability and compassion, right? Like that's the piece I think that I'm like trying to figure out around this like sexual relationship stuff particularly, is it's like it's hard for me to understand a woman who just can't state what they want or need because that's never been my experience. But I can imagine if that is your personality or like whether you've been socially trained in that way or whatever, like you could argue there's lots of factors that cause women to be in that way. um I can't imagine how hard it would be to like break out of that. So like how do we help those women, which might be similar to like for you, how did you get past the walking away? Because you said like that was an issue for you, like how did that grow? Because I'm wondering maybe we could apply that to the first step too.
Well, how did I specifically overcome it? Uh, a drug overdose and a near death experience.
Fair enough. So like we would call that clinically like almost like a conversion experience, like something so radical where it's like life isn't the same anymore afterwards. Like
Hmm.
it's a whole different
Exactly.
landscape. Okay. What
Uh,
shifted for you?
what shifted for me?
Yeah, you had this conversion experience, but something changed where you said,
Oh, afterwards.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I got so comfortable just being with myself.
Hmm.
That was
Interesting.
honestly like, I think I went most of my life always needing somebody, or like if I wasn't in someone's company, I was like waiting to be in someone's company, or I was thinking about, I don't know, like who was neglecting me and maybe who should pay attention to me. That occupied a lot of my just like early life up until like my um early to mid 20s.
Yeah.
And I don't think it was until I was like 25 that I was fine just being with myself for like 2 years. And I think doing that, really like forcing myself into that solitary time, um the isolation is probably not super healthy, but I'm working out of it, out of the isolation thing now with streaming.
Mhm.
But overall, I think that's like what broke me down, and if anything, like allowed me to like rewire myself. And from there, from that, I made like really deliberate efforts into forming good habits. Um, I took everything that I knew that was probably bad for me beforehand, I dropped them, and I tried to pick up things that were good for me. Um, I don't know if League of Legends was like one that I was supposed to do, but that one made it through the cracks.
Yeah.
I quit smoking, which is supposed to like be this vicious anxiety enabler. kind of thing.
Yeah.
You feel like it's relieving your anxiety. It's actually just like
Making it worse. Yeah.
reintroducing it to you. Yeah, yeah. But like I don't know how much I like sharing that with people though. I feel like
Mhm.
that's such an unreasonable ask.
Yeah.
It's probably a dangerous ask. It's unhealthy. If anything, it infantilizes, not infantilizes. It romanticizes um overdosing and stuff like that and
Yeah,
really
I
unhealthy
mean,
habits.
maybe. I don't know if anyone. It's hard to say if you can romanticize almost dying. I think
Tell that to the
maybe.
people who complain about 13 reasons why.
Yeah, it's fair, but that's a little bit. I would say that's a little bit different than what you're saying, at least. I wouldn't say that they're
Oh,
analogous
okay.
situations. Right, because 13 Reasons Why she suicided, but then she also like kind of got all of her vengeance too. Whereas
Mm-hmm.
it's like that's not what you're describing. You're saying like I almost died, and I said, "Holy shit, something has to change, or I'm gonna actually die." Right, like now,
Yeah.
it has to change now. And what we call that in addictions is actually people who have like those like conversions. Whether it's religious or not actually isn't the point. It's more about like it seems to be the case that like they're just their psyche shifts. Like something is just different now, and they're like, nope, fuck that shit. I'm doing life differently now. And yeah, it is an unreasonable
Mm-hmm.
ask. You can't just like tell people like, hey, have a conversion of your personality in psychology, right? Like that's not reasonable because every fucking person would be like, I'd love to, been trying to for 15 years, you know?
Okay, so what you were saying before about talking to women and realizing like, oh shit, I'm in a unique position
Mhm.
because I've already got this like foundational work basically, which is like being argumentative or um
We would call it in psych like disagreeable. Like you're willing to be disagreeable.
disagreeable.
Yeah.
Okay. I know from having some pretty like wonderful women in my life who are very open and like liberal about their sexuality that we are fucking stupid. We're so dumb. We're so fucking lost. Uh and
Women
I'm going
or
to
all people?
probably all people, but specifically women.
Okay.
I'm just going to talk shit about my girlfriends right now because and I'll link this to her, Amber, still is at the point where she's inviting men to her house for a first date
Right.
from like stranger danger from the internet, still inviting them to her house because it just feels more comfortable there. And like you feel like you are setting yourself up for success by being in your comfort zone, by loosening your inhibitions. A nice glass of wine will make it easier for me. And all of these things are like, they feel comfortable to you. But if you step outside and you consider the worst case scenario, oh, these are actually bad moves. You probably shouldn't first invite a stranger to your house. Um, for a first date, you don't know them. You probably shouldn't be drunk for your first date. You don't know them. um, it's difficult. I think being a woman and wanting these engagements and wanting this experience with another person and for it to be wonderful right off the bat that we're willing to like put our own risk, I mean, our own like health and safety at risk.
Right. And so I guess one thing that I want to like I wouldn't even say it's a pushback, but I'm wondering about like how do
Hmm.
we like thread in because here's the thing is I actually like I really want to help women like be safe. Like I want fundamentally my goal is what can I do to educate women to reduce sexual assaults and domestic violence? That's what I would like to do. Obviously I'm going to tell men don't rape women, don't abuse women. The problem is that
Good job.
men who don't do those things aren't listening to shit like this, right? Whereas women who are like stuck and they're just trying to figure out and they're like, I just want to have a nice relationship. That's all I want. Like my
Hmm.
heart goes to them because I'm like, fuck, me too. That's all I want for you too. And I'm trying to navigate the space of how do we have compassion for Amber while also addressing the behavior? Because I find like if you address things like sometimes people need tough love and I get that but usually people are more receptive to these types of conversations. I'm not saying specifically
Hmm.
talking about Amber. I don't know your relationship, but I'm talking about in an online sphere where nobody knows me from anyone. They're just going to see me and they're going to make pretty snap judgments, right? So if I'm coming in hot and being like, women, don't be dumbasses, don't do these dangerous things, it sounds victim blamey esque, right? Because I've heard actual victim
Why?
blamers. Why does it sound victim blamey?
Yeah, I feel like if okay, if that's not how you normally talk, then yeah, maybe it comes off victim blamey. But if you on a regular would just like yell at somebody, I don't think it's I don't think it's victim blamey.
I guess it reminds me of old rhetoric I've heard much older men use, like in judicial systems, where they're asking about rapes, where they're asking about clothes that the individual is wearing, or they're asking about like certain things when it's like a violent rape situation, right? And the problem is that it's like clothes have nothing to do with a rape situation. And the only reason you're bringing this up is to actually engage in victim blaming, which in the judicial system we see a lot of. We see a lot of like defense um, attacking her character, talking about how she sleeps with lots of men. And so I think that's why is because when we hear that, I actually think that that's really harmful because there's actual cases where in judicial systems we see this happening.
Mhm.
And
So
so people are so turned off from that rhetoric that they're like, fuck it, anything that even sounds like it, I don't want to hear it.
okay. So when we so are we doing the thing where we have to like dumb everything down with like the most like rainbows and butterfly language because we just want to reach women? So we talk to them
Children?
like they're stupid triggered children. Yeah.
Um,
Like I can't just tell you, "Hey, that is dumb as fuck that you're about to send your first date your address."
yeah. Yeah. And I think
That's
with our friends
stupid.
who we have rapport with, you probably should do that, right?
No,
I'm
but
trying
why
to look
not
at
a stranger?
why not a stranger? I think because they're unlikely to listen, mostly. I would like to get rhetoric to the point where we could, to be honest. I would like to see that
Mhm.
where we can just engage with women equally. But I think like the reality is that the infantilization of women is like perniciously deep in our society. And it's not obvious to me. There are cons and pros that come with being infantilized as an individual. Cons are that people don't respect you in the workplace as much. They don't give as much weight to things that you say, right? It's fucking annoying. Pros, though, are that you
Mhm.
can escape certain levels of responsibility in certain adult engagements that you might not otherwise have to. And so it seems like there's like this resistance to fully let go of infantilization. And I find, and I guess I'm not convinced. I'm not convinced either way, but I'm trying to figure out the language needed because I've been talking to women in a one-on-one setting, and I've also talked to women in an educational setting. And it's not obvious to me the way to get people to listen of saying, how do we take accountability? I don't want to sound like a victim blamey judge who asks a girl, what were you wearing? When it's like a stranger violent rape, right? Because it's not relevant and it's just kind of shitty. It's more than shitty. I would say it's fucking traumatic for a lot of those women. But I still want to have the same conversation of being like, why are you inviting this guy to your house? You've literally never met him. That's like the most dangerous thing you can do. He has your address now. What happens if things go really bad, right? Like what, like all these what ifs of danger. And so that's what I'm asking you is like, how do we navigate this conversation? And maybe you don't have the answer. I think
Um
I'm brainstorming, I think, with you.
I think the okay, well, I think we would just be at like two different ends of this. Um I would like to move away from like the coddling language, the um paint it with rainbows, um like file it down, sand it, make it not so rough around the edges. Like I would just rip off the band-aid and say it how it is.
Mhm.
And maybe that's my upbringing. Listen, having a Dominican mother, Italian father, there's a lot of arguing on not just like in the household, every fucking family party, just just spending my summers in Dominican Republic. People are very crass, they're very to the point, they're very exactly how it is. If you are fat, your nickname is Gordo. Like we just call you fat. You don't even have a first name. You're just fat. If you're ugly, your nickname is Fea. You're just ugly.
Right.
And that's how it is, and you're almost like, well, well, shit. Okay, I'm ugly. I don't know. What am I gonna do? Cry about it? This is the face that I was born with. I find that if, especially if women just like allow women to be this blunt and this crass with each other, like we could probably get a lot closer to being able to like talk to each other like this. But I
Yeah.
feel like I am almost everyone's first stop when it comes to like discourse like this recently or over the past couple months. I'm everyone's first stop. Like, hold on, Cherry, you're a woman. You should understand. Or this is a woman. Come on, don't you get it? Like they need help. They're triggered. Like, you think that because I'm a woman, I'm supposed to understand that you need to be held or something? Do you think there's some sort of maternal instinct in me that's supposed to switch off when I see like someone who just wants to cry on the internet? Like, there isn't.
Mhm.
Um, and for me, I find that just so, it's not fucked, but I just feel like I'm erased as a person because I need to be some sort of like coddly, bubbly woman like everyone else. And if I'm not that way, like I'm the wrong kind of woman. I'm the wrong kind of advocate. I'm not who people want to hear from. And then in those circles, they just like reinforce that. I don't want to correct myself for them. Like, I don't want to correct myself for like past me who needed like me today to lay it thick on her. Does that make
Mm.
sense?
Yeah, it's kind of like there's a certain element of like if we coddle too much, then we don't develop a certain level of thick skin. And people need to have a certain level of thick skin and like self-confidence essentially to navigate through life, to be taken seriously, to navigate the fact that like life is a tragic experience a lot of the time. It's not exclusively tragic. There's a lot of fucking bullshit that you have to go through and a lot of actual
Mm-hmm.
suffering. And you need to have some level of resilience. It seems to me, though, that in part, what I want to do is I think I recognize that I am an individual who is probably somewhat privileged with my disagreeableness, my willingness to walk away kind of always. I learned that one pretty young. Um, Kind of had to, almost like a conversion level of had to walk away because I like, I would
Mm-hmm.
have, I was like medically burning out if I didn't start walking away. Um, and, uh, resilient, highly resilient. And I don't want to leave behind the women who, because I think that there are different personalities. I think there are genuinely some people who are kind of a tough nut at the core that kind of just always still get up. And there's something really incredible about that. But that doesn't make me not sympathetic for the individual who isn't. And it's not obvious to me that even if you could raise them to not be to
Mm-hmm.
not have that kind of soft squishy inner core, maybe you could, maybe it's a parenting problem, but they're 25 now, and that's what they've been kind of handed in life. It's not obvious to me that just harsh, like kind of harsh, thick skin treatment is getting them into safer relationships and into places where they assert their boundaries. I think that's my concern. Is it's not obvious to me always that tough love works, um,
I
even
feel
though
like
it's my predilection too.
I think this is your like psychologist shit coming out. I think you guys are almost programmed to try to be able to solve a multitude of people's problems, right? You want any person who comes in front of you, you want to be able to be um the the sound of the voice of reason, whatever, like that. You kind of have to be like Ditto, the Pokemon. You just have to like shapeshift or whatever. I am not like, my goal is to not be the solution for every single type of woman or every single type of like victim.
Mhm.
I'm definitely going to be able to help somebody. There's definitely somebody who needs to hear from me, or somebody who maybe would feel like a child being coddled, um, or feel like they aren't respected when somebody like coddles them. Like, I think I help that person. I would just rather be confident in like who I am and what I am and how I can help, and not so much like create the ideal woman or the ideal like responder to a victim, or the ideal responder to like a traumatized person, and like make everyone be that. I feel like it's a big ask, and it's maybe something that is never possible.
Yeah, and I agree. I actually don't think I would expect most people to do that, and I don't think you have any obligation to anyone for anything. I would agree with that. So, like, I guess just to clarify, this isn't me trying to
Mhm.
argue, Cherry, you should be nicer in how you say things. That's not what I'm saying, because that's
It's
not
cool.
you're not trying to occupy, right? If you were trying to be like a women's empowerment advocate, all these things, I'd probably have that critique of being like, you'll probably get more people that are willing to listen to you. You'll probably be slightly more effective as an educator if you do these things within, because here's the thing, niceness is not moral, It's cultural, right? Particularly the niceness that like we kind of require, like what you're talking about, like this kind of mamby-pamby language and stuff like that.
Well, okay, niceness out of women is maybe what's like expected. When
Yep.
you are like a men's advocate, if you are enabling or like uplifting men, we do not have this standard of requiring them to be nice. Um, so I'm not going to say like what my goals are
Yeah.
or anything like that. I like to keep them personal to me, but
Mhm.
I do think that there is absolutely room for like a woman who is not kind, who is very rough around the edges and is very blunt to be a role model.
Oh yeah, for
I
sure.
think we're not used to accepting that out of women.
Yeah, and I think it's actually okay. So here's a conversation that might be more interesting to you, right? Because I straddle, like I'm an educator, right? So I straddle, how
Hmm.
do I effectively educate people? And part of how, in my experience in working with clients who come from various things, is there are certain things that work to educate people well and get them to buy into certain ideas that might actually benefit them long term, right? And then there's this other thing that you're talking about, which is gender norms. And I'm totally behind you on the frustration with gender norms. And it's interesting because, okay, so here's the question. How do we, because the gender norm that you're talking about, like there is space for a blunt woman. I would say right now there isn't, not really. Most women who are super blunt, that are like super female empowered, become fucking terrible bosses who are just mean and cruel. Not just mean, they're fucking cruel. I don't know if you've had that experience, but I've had quite a few female bosses that honestly like weren't just mean, they like went out of their way to like literally try to destroy my career, like pretty much for no reason, and they did it to multiple people. And I'm not saying all female bosses are like this, but I'm concerned because I find a lot of female empowerment centralized around this, where it's like, I'm a girl boss because I'm mean, and I'm like, well, that's not really empowerment. Like maybe like if you're a particularly like dry, but blunt doesn't have to be mean, right? It just means like you're gonna say what you think,
Yeah.
and
Yeah,
that's fine
blunt
with
is
me.
just honest. Okay.
Yeah, right. Whereas mean, there's oftentimes a vindictiveness that's part of it, right? Like they're not just saying what they think, they're saying what they think in the way that they know is maybe will hurt you a little bit. Whether they're feeling petulant or petty or whatever the reason behind it. Um, and so you're kind of talking about this gender norm of like, we're trying to teach women how to be self-empowered. And yet we're using kind of soft mamby language, which is literally falling within the expected gender norm of what we tell women they need to be, which is nice and agreeable. Um, and then we're saying, why aren't you empowered yet? And it's like, well, of course they're not, right? There isn't really space, right? I grew up in like very white Protestant fundamental conservative, right? There's no space for a female who like loves science and like disagrees with male pastors on theology
Yeah,
and
but
stuff all the time.
you just make the space for it though. And
Ideally, yes.
it's difficult, but I think that there are people even like throughout history who have like forced that to happen. And I think like I come from an upbringing where like I've gotten to see that and I get to see that even today. Like my mom just decided to move to like a really fucking racist part of Georgia, and you would you would think like, hey, it's really difficult for you to just like integrate different cultures and stuff like that in racist towns because they will make it uncomfortable for you to be there. You can't expect this out of people, and people aren't going to be receptive to it. Well, it's not going to be accepted until somebody decides to fucking do it. They were not happy when she moved there. There was a lot of questions. How did you get this house? Because they like had this whole thing where like neighbors would buy up the houses and before it could get sold to somebody. And she didn't give a fuck, and what 3 years later most of the town loves her.
Right.
Like forcing your way through and kind of like showing people like, hey, this is not like accepted. I don't care.
Yeah.
I'm not an asshole. I'm a blunt person. I'm not like you. I'm a bit different, but if you give it time you will see that like we could get along. uh I would rather share stories of how like the one-offs happen and the one-offs make it and how it's even possible than to go back to, you know, explaining why it's difficult for people to get it done and explaining away why it's okay for you to fail here, explaining away why it's okay that we don't have this yet. It seems almost like creating an excuse that nobody like needs anymore.
Yep. I think sometimes there's excusing. I think in the middle there is human as well, though, which is, I think it's important to normalize what is human. And there's something of like a genuine critique that I have of men. So I would say the way that we approach women around like sex and all this coddly, nicey shit is almost expressly opposite of how we approach men, right? I think Kevin Samuels is a great example of this. In fact, I appreciate Kevin Samuels because at least he's consistent, regardless of like race, gender, creed. He's just gonna like be direct with you, right? And I can appreciate it, right? I appreciate that in people. I can also understand people who have a hard time with that as well. And so what I'm trying to figure out, and you might just like disagree with me to the end, and that's fine. Like I'm genuinely totally okay with that, because I can respect your position. But I think sometimes like the harsh language, like saying like you're fat and just calling them fat, I'm like, to what end? Like, what's the purpose? Like, is there any benefit there?
To just calling somebody fat?
Yeah.
I don't think there's any benefit of calling someone fat.
Right.
Probably when they get to like the level of obesity, you wouldn't even use the word fat. You'd say like obese, and it's probably to like, let them know that they have a problem if they didn't know. I imagine when you get to obese that though.
Yeah, that's fair. And I think that's kind of my question is like sometimes there's a bluntness that it doesn't seem to have a purpose. And if you don't have a goal, it's whatever. But when it comes to these conversations, it's something I've tried to navigate because even though like you're experiencing, and a lot of people experiencing like you're so nice, you're so patient and stuff like that, like meet me 10 years ago, like super blunt, super direct, said things. I didn't tailor any of my language to like be nicey nice with anyone. And
but that can't work with your career though, right?
No, definitely not. Right.
Yeah.
But something I wonder about with men is we're super willing to be harsh with men in that way, right? You're short, you're fat, fix that shit. Stop being a victim. Just fucking fix it, right? And it doesn't seem to me that level of directness, even with men who are maybe more socially cultured into being okay with that type of language, it doesn't seem to be helping a lot of them. There's kind of this space where I would like to expect more of women. I want women to be able to regulate themselves more. I want them to take honest, like, feedback. I want them to take actual accountability and responsibility for things and kind of feel basically the agency to like navigate the world on their own. And I actually want to be a little bit softer with men, and not lose the accountability or the compassion on either side. And I don't think that it has to look necessarily like mamby-pamby language, because I think like there's a lot of really blunt people I know in my life who you also know that they like love deeply, and they love you deeply. I imagine your mom might be one of those people with like how quickly people came to like love her. Is I don't know her, but that's kind of what I hear in it. Sorry, I'm pausing as you just took a big bite. My apology. Try to add a little bit more. Usually I can monologue super well. I guess those are kind of my thoughts. And like, this isn't me trying to convince you, just to be really clear. Like, because a lot of times on Twitch, people come on, and it sounds like for your experience, people come on and they try to convince you of something. Be like, be nicer, right? Say things nicely.
Oh, I get be nicer a lot.
And that's not what I'm
be
doing.
Nicer, or that like, oh, come on, Cherry, you should understand. And
yeah,
the fuck does that mean?
Yeah,
I do understand. That's exactly why I'm saying something.
Yeah, and I think if you would approached me and been like, hey, let's talk about these things and how do we do a better job talking about it, I'd probably be trying to convince you of those things. But I approached you to talk, right? So I'm not trying to argue you into this. It's helpful for me to flesh out my position on this because you have a really strong like no bullshit position, and I'm like, I get that, but I'm obviously, oh gosh,
no,
I'm like here, you know.
I wish you could convince me to be a nicer person. I put a lot of effort to being kind to people. And there's a lot of times where I just don't find it to be necessary. And I think being a streamer, being an advocate for anything, and giving advice on the internet are 3 times where I just don't find it necessary to be nice.
Why?
I don't think it does anybody favors. if you take your advice and you like add rainbows to it. If all you needed was me to be a little kinder when I said these words, or to phrase it in a nicer way, phrase it in a way that doesn't like, that softens the blow, you weren't going to listen to it regardless. Like, I've been in that position. I know very well how often we will make excuses for ourselves of why we didn't listen, why we fell back into our cycle. You're not going to shame me for what I know is just your desire to loop, your desire to take 3 steps backwards. You don't get to put that on me.
Right. You kind of like, you don't want to have to do the legwork for like people's own issues.
I just don't want them to paint their issues as being my issue. Like, there is a problem here. I'm just being honest about it. And you're almost painting it, not you, the person who would complain. The person who would complain like, hey, if you were nicer, you're almost painting it as if all of your problems would have been fixed if I was just capable of giving you advice in a kind way, which implies that you know better. It implies that you know the correct solution here. Me being kind was never going to be the issue. You are taking the loop and taking the step back that you want to do and finding a way to not be responsible for that and putting it on me. And I know I'm a little too grown to give a fuck.
Right. I guess my question is, because in general, I think if an idea is popular enough amongst a bunch of people, there's probably something true in it.
Slavery was super popular. Like, the majority rules is not always the case, especially when we are trying to like break norms.
Right. It's not so much about majority rules at all. It's about the fact that like, and it might not always be the case, right? Like Hitler's ideas became really popular in general. Probably not something that there's something good and live in there. But you have to like, I want to analyze things before I just toss it all out. And so when it comes to like, I want be nicer, right? Because I get that too. Ironically enough, I get that all the time too. Be nicer. And I'm like, I'm pretty fucking nice in how I say things. Like,
you already
nice.
seem too nice.
Yeah, I would argue I am too nice a lot of the times, right? I guess when I look at this, I go, there's a reason everyone's saying it. And it might be that I just need to throw it all away and say, fuck it. Doesn't matter. But maybe they're getting at something, because I found, at least in my personal journey, there was lots of times where I would feel something and I was getting at something deeply true for myself. I just wasn't getting the right language. I hadn't actually put my finger on the thing yet, you know? And so when I hear people say, be nice, I think what I realized in it is that I actually heard people say, I'm just human, right? Can we normalize just being human? And this might be my bias because, like I said, I come from a really like stringent Protestant fundamentalist background where it's like, you're not just like fucking up, you're bad, right? And like maybe even evil. But I found like a quote that comes to my mind a lot, that I use a lot, is sometimes things are understandable, but that doesn't always make it excusable. Right. And so we can understand why somebody's in that position without excusing the behavior. Like, how do we do kind of this dialectic of,
oh man, I think we'll just never agree on this one. Yeah, I don't hear anything when somebody says be nicer. I kind of, maybe like a toddler crying comes to mind. Maybe like visualizing a temper tantrum or something like that. I don't hear people say I'm just a human, because me being blunt is also pretty human. I don't know. We just have a way of picking and choosing whose feelings matter, and I think whoever is the most offended, whoever is the saddest, and whoever cries will always be put first.
yes,
Whoever you can visibly see or audibly hear is upset is who will go first. And
yes.
one of the horrible effects of being emotionally stable or emotionally guarded or even just like lacking emotions is you get painted in to be like bad, to be wrong, to not be human,
Yeah.
to not have like appropriate responses to other people's emotions. And I feel like the more that we ask those people to be different, to react different, the more we set up emotional people to not accept it.
Hmm.
It's like we're forcing everyone in society to be a certain way rather than like, hey, traumatized people, sad people, stressy, depressy people, guess what? Half of the world, maybe not half, but a lot of people are not going to meet you on that like empathetic level.
Hmm. Yeah.
And you should learn to not need that.
Yes. I agree with you 100% actually. I absolutely do. I am trying to figure out a palatable way to deliver that information. That's what I'm trying to do. Because I would
Mhm.
fundamentally agree. I think that there is absolutely a coddling that has happened within our society. I think is a really big issue, particularly with women, because it infantilizes women. And I think it's really, really tragic that we infantilize women.
And
I
it
think,
doesn't just infantilize women. It takes like the people who don't need to be coddled, they get torn down
yes,
as a side effect.
it rigidifies actually gender norms as well, because if it's
Mhm.
particularly so white women like you probably get called pick me's, all sorts of things like that, which is just basically giving you a
Actually,
slur. Yeah,
I get called that a lot. Yeah.
you get called pick me a lot.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
me
do.
too. Anytime I talk about men's mental health, I get called a pick me sometimes on TikTok. I haven't been called a pick me
It's
yet
always,
on Twitch, but
oh, just wait
maybe.
for it. It'll happen. It's funny. The people who call me pick me's is usually because they've already decided that they would never pick me. And that's why that word just comes to mind for them. It's pretty disgusting.
Well, the problem is it's a slur against you as a woman, right? They wouldn't be calling you, they're calling you a pick me because
Mhm.
you're a young, attractive female with a different, you're not part of girls club, basically. And that's in my mind, that's a slur. It's a super big problem. It's super cringe. And the issue is it actually rigidifies gender norms because you're telling women you
Mhm.
don't get to be blunt and direct. It's not okay,
Yeah.
basically. And I think that that's a really big issue. And I think it's fair for you to say, I want to teach women how to just be blunt and direct and deal with their own shit. Like I said, I'm not trying to convince you that you have to move on this position because my
Mhm.
whole goal is I want to help women move on this position. And I don't think you care. I don't know, but I'm assuming that you don't care if women change their position on this, like societally.
um I feel like I care, not enough to change who I am.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't view it as changing who I am at all. Because who I am is fundamentally somebody who like wants to actually like enrich people. Wow, that sounded really fucking
Yeah,
moralizing.
that sounded really fucked
That's not
up. What the
how I
hell?
meant it at all. Because it implies that you don't. And that's not what I'm trying to say at all.
Okay.
I think, trying to think of the better way to say that. Because I need to be clear, I'm not immoralizing you at all. I think if you have different focuses and goals, you can engage in different things. And I'm not trying to sit here and be like, Cherry, you should be nice.
I
Do
think
you,
I think you could just say what your goal is, without implying what mine isn't.
sure. Um, the issue is that I didn't imply what yours isn't. It was like you could take it that way if you gave it like the least charitable interpretation, um, which is that like I want women to be able to have conversations like this, right? You and I are able to engage, and it's like I'm not getting really personally offended. I'm hoping I'm not personally offending you. It seems
No.
like you're willing to just continue to engage with me at an equal
Mhm.
level, which I really, really, really appreciate because I often find that when I have conversations with women, I have to like tailor things around um, to get them to to my position, which is frustrating. And I don't want to engage in a coddling of women anymore. I think it's actually just bad. I think it's like the one thing of like, I think I would argue we're in a post patriarchal society. And I think that's like a thing inherited from old traditionalism that's super cringe. And
Yeah.
there's no space for it.
We're almost readopting it in an unhealthy way,
Yeah. Yeah.
where people forget where it comes from.
Yeah. Like actually. Um, but it's tricky because then I talk with most women, right? Like if I sat you down and I was like, hey, Cherry, these are some things you should do, right? If say you were having an issue and I was like, okay, well, stop fucking doing these 5 things. You'd be like, All right. And you'd either take my advice or not. And that would be the end of it, right? Like that, it would begin and end probably there. I find that that's not always the case. I think a lot of times what women do is women have been taught a little bit that we put our emotions on other people and other people are accountable for, in part, how we feel, which I think is actually like, again, it removes agency from women by saying like other people have to change how they act to fix how you feel. The issue is that I find that there's a balance there because I've had like objectively pretty abusive people be like, well, offense is taken, not given. And I'm like, well, sometimes offense is taken if you're being a vindictive asshole, right? And these are the clients that I'm in the house that like they're fucking bullying people. They're like pushing them around. They're like glaring at them every time they come in. They're like trying to like scare them, right? And I'm just like, okay, well, like there's a balance here. Like, yes, offense is taken, not given, but also like if you're intending offense, that's a little bit different, right?
Yeah, I would agree.
Okay. And so I'm trying to figure out how to get women into talking to me about these things that are less like maybe your personality or my personality, because I think that you're willing to be there and I would like to see the gender norms reduced, but I don't know. I'm not sure if I'm convinced that all women could be there because it might just not be their personality.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess I don't really get how you plan on doing this. Well, I guess you don't even know how you're planning on doing this. Do you feel like this is like a life mission where like what is it? You want to just break women away from like the patriarchy or something? To have like better, safer sex?
I wouldn't reduce it down to the patriarchy.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, what's going on here? Because I think you lost me now.
Sure. What I'm trying to figure out is it is a bit of a mission of mine. It is something I'm very passionate about, right? I'm being trained in forensic psychology. I'm really passionate about particularly people with high levels of trauma, and a really common trauma for women is sexual assault. And I'm trying to figure out how to have the conversation at a preventative point, which is I think what social media is best at is actually preventative education, not like response afterwards. Of how do we prevent these things from happening?
And you want to talk to people on the internet for how to do this. I would say you're like in the wrong place. I don't think
disagree, I guess.
Double tap like me.
Okay, so well, maybe it's my like terrible view of streamers. I feel like we're all like a little traumatized. So I think you'd kind of be picking from a pool of people who have already been through the shits. Maybe still stuck in the shit. Are you just like looking for more traumatized people to talk to?
I wouldn't say I'm looking for more traumatized people to talk to. I actually don't know what that means either.
Okay, I'm just trying to figure out what you said because you're like, I don't want to talk to more people like you. I want to talk to more of like this type of people.
I didn't say not like you. I love talking to people like you because you steel man my position. But you're not crying out for help either. I'm not trying to help people acutely because traumatized people implies I'm trying to rescue them from something. I'm not trying to rescue anyone.
No, but are you like trying to pick their brains, or are we trying to like get more information?
I'm
like
picking your brain.
having these talks with other people, like what is the goal?
Okay.
Is it to understand them or understand what they think the solution would be?
Yeah. So with you, it's to understand your position. I knew that you were probably going to have a firmer position on this, which is really good for me. I really like talking to people that I differ on because it actually steel mans my position. It gives me new ideas, right? Particularly people who aren't like super classic white Protestant culture, which is where I've been like born and raised in. It's like genuinely super helpful to be like, hey, just because it's culture doesn't mean it's fucking right. It's just a thing. Like it's just arbitrary. Niceness is an arbitrary thing. We like it. We like it. And if I'm going to talk to white women, I'm going to have to be nice because that's our culture, right? So what I'm trying to do with you is just to flesh out my position, just to understand your position more, because I think it's an interesting conversation. What I'm trying to do with my platform is definitely be willing to be like on debate panels, right? My goal on a debate panel is absolutely going to be to either move debaters or move viewers more towards my position. I think that's why you go on debate panels, is fundamentally, I think my idea is probably better than the other people's, which is why I'm debating it, right? And trying to
Hmm.
convince people of my position. Solo streams, I'm interested in educating on these things. Okay, there's a question. There's a panel I'm going to be on pretty soon, and I won't go into detail about it because I'm sure I don't know if they promoted it yet or anything. That's talking about
Hmm.
like positive sex education for women. So it's really wanting to be focused not on things that women shouldn't do, but on what things women should do. Um, so when it comes to sex, particularly casual sex, what do you think women should do?
They should know what they want.
How do they figure that out?
Um, it depends on the type of person you are. You might know what you want when you read your horoscope, but when you pray to your God, when you meditate, when you want drink your coffee in the morning, whatever introspection you're capable of doing to understand what you want to have sex, you gotta do that first before you engage in sex. Are you Where is your mental with sex? Do you view sex as something for pleasure? Is this intimacy for you? Is this how you connect with another person? Are you looking for love? Are you looking for lasting relationships? Are you looking for a quick one? Like, I think that's the most important thing to consider first and foremost. I believe that a lot of women engage in casual sex without really understanding what they're looking to get out of it or even how they view sex, period. Um, fuck, I could probably just have a whole conversation about like what is sex to you and
Yeah.
like what are you looking to explore with it? How far are you willing to go and why do you draw those lines at those particular places? I always I'm at a place right now where sex is just it's an experience for me. It's pleasure for me. You know, over time, it forces me to stop and think, well, why have I drawn a line here? If the goal is pleasure, like I've drawn lines at certain places, like I don't know how graphic I can get with you.
No, go for
Um,
it. Yeah.
like no anal, no threesomes. Like I've drawn these lines and I'm really forced the more I like explore into sex positivity and my readings and stuff like that, just more forced to explore, well, why have I drawn these lines? If I think sex is pleasure for pleasure, why have I drawn a line at something that could possibly like give me pleasure? It it's probably because I haven't thought through everything about what sex is to me.
Mhm.
Um and so now I'm exploring that. Even as someone who I feel like personally engages in really healthy casual sex, and I think I go about it for a really good reason, um, that I understand and I make sure my partners understand, I still have like more to explore. So absolutely people that I would see engaging in casual sex in an unhealthy way, they definitely have more to explore. But yeah, so that first question of what is sex to you, and why is sex that to you? I think that's a really good focal or like starting point.
Okay. Yeah. And so I guess an immediate like pushback that I could see people giving is okay, you need to know what you want and what you want from sex before you start engaging in it. But a lot of people, I think, especially like young people, learn in part what they want based on their experiences. Be like, I like that. Oh, I didn't like that. So how do you navigate that?
Okay, so now you're talking about like just like physically what you enjoy in sex.
To some extent, but I think part of how you figure out what you want from sex, because right, like different people have different sex drives, and the horn. I actually see sex drive and horniness as a bit of a separate thing, where horniness seems to be like and like lust. See, not horniness, sorry, lust versus
Hmm.
sexual drive. I think are a little bit
Yeah,
different because lust seems to be
they
kind
are
of
different.
fantasy, more fantasy oriented to a certain extent, right? Whereas sex drive is just how often you're wanting to engage in sex. And
Hmm.
so I think a lot of people, if they haven't engaged in much sexual activity, they might not know the answers to really fundamental things like what is sex to me? Um, why, what level, how often do I need sex? And I'm not sure I'm convinced that like masturbation alone can give you those, because a lot of people are like, well, you figure that stuff out safely through masturbation. And I'm like,
No, yeah.
no,
So
I don't know if you do actually.
So that would be the physical. So wanting to understand your body and how to be pleasured, you would tell someone, well, if for anyone else to be able to get you off, you really need to be able to get yourself off.
Right.
I think that's the only time that you would say like masturbation is like really
Yes.
focal or really necessary. As for like what is sex to you, that's just something that you will learn as time goes on, but you will at any moment in time, you will have like sex will mean something to you. It can change, but it absolutely will always have a meaning to you. Um Whether it's in the beginning and like for you sex means shame. It means something you're not supposed to do.
Mm.
And you engage in it anyway, that's probably not very healthy. Um or sex can mean creating a relationship, which I think when you're young is true. You can feel that like if you engage in sex that you will like, hold on to that boyfriend or something like that. And like that can feel true, but it's not healthy. But that is sometimes what like young women will think about sex. This is how I hold a relationship.
Right.
Sometimes you can move that to feeling like sex is a way to punish yourself. There are women who, um, I don't know, in their late teens, early 20s, can use sex as a way to devalue themselves the way that the world has taught them. And that's why they're going to engage in casual sex at that point. It's because like the world has convinced them of something and they're just like reinforcing that. These things will always change as you grow.
Yeah.
And it's just, you can avoid it if you think about it more.
Right.
Instead of letting everyone else sort of give you the recipe of what it should be.
Right. Yeah. And there's this thing that you have to do of like, obviously there's individual needs within all this. There isn't like a single piece of advice I can give all women and la di da, all sex problems are fixed. Obviously that's not the case, right? But I do think that there's probably good rules of thumb that we can use as well, right? Like you said, what is sex to you? Like, what does that actually mean, right? I would say like, yeah, if you can't, like when I teach my teams, I'm like, look, if you can't say the word sex out loud, you probably shouldn't be having it, you know?
And not just sex. You should be able to say fucking, penis, dick, vagina, pussy. You should say
Anal.
all of it.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, I agree, right? And so like my teens, when I'm educating them on this stuff, right, they always like giggle and are tee hee, but I'm like, no, really, like sex is like it's a significant choice to make. I'm not saying that it's like the most significant choice you'll ever make in your life, obviously not. But it's like it is a deeply vulnerable, intimate position to be in with people. It can be extremely positive and nice, and it can be really fucking traumatic. And so we just have to think about that, right? It's not about saying like sex is bad or sex good. It's about saying sex is sex. It's just a thing. But you can engage with it in healthy ways or unhealthy ways.
And I think it's easier to engage it in healthy ways when you really decide for yourself what you want it to be.
You think that there is a one size fits all, like things that sex shouldn't be?
A one size fits all? No.
Or a rule of thumb that you probably shouldn't have sex be this thing. Like you mentioned punishment to yourself. Like that to me is something where I'm like, it's probably something that you should look at, right?
That's hard to say because I do feel like there's the kink community that does get off and very much enjoys the aspect of punishment, and that is related to sex for them. So I'm skeptical of going in that route.
When you said punishment, did you mean it in the BDSM way, or did you mean it in more of like the self-sabotagey way?
Yeah, I didn't mean it in the BDSM way, self-sabotaging. But like when I hear punishment, I feel like I have to be cautious.
And clarify, that's fair. So obviously there's kink community, right? But I wouldn't say kink community is engaging in self-sabotage broadly. I'm sure maybe individuals within it are or are not. But yeah, I've absolutely had clients with sex addictions that absolutely engage in sex as a bit of a form of like self-sabotage and self-destruction. And I guess my question is, what are your thoughts on that?
On having sex for self-sabotage?
Yeah, when you mention punishment, is that something that sex shouldn't be?
Yeah, you probably shouldn't engage in casual sex if you are in a if you're doing it to reinforce the idea that like bad things should happen to you.
Because I remember Katie walking you down a line of conversation around like self-harm with sex and her being like, what? It feels to me like you guys are arguing that this person is engaging in self-harm by repeatedly engaging in sex, in actions with sex that have led to like shitty situations like being stealthed. And you were really
I don't.
uncomfortable with like being like, is that self-harm? And I remember listening to that and being like, I also don't like calling that self-harm. That doesn't feel like quite right. But
Well,
it's
because
something, right?
I don't know if it's self-harm to not realize that you suck at establishing or asserting your boundaries, or that you aren't good at like conflict resolution, or just like voicing your, having that confidence. I don't know if that's self-harm.
Right. Feels like a weird choice of words because it's self-harm to me is like something that you're choosing to do oftentimes to like manage emotions or numb, and it's like an active
Yeah.
form of like I'm trying literally to harm myself to escape something, or like there's a lot of reasons why people engage in
I think it's more
self-injurious
so like
behavior.
risky. It's risky behavior. But maybe, okay.
Or is it
I
like
feel like when people
negligence?
engage, maybe negligence, but I just don't think somebody in that situation even knows that they're setting themselves up for failure.
Yeah, they definitely are.
Like, if you say that this has happened 3 times and then you're really shocked when people think that you shouldn't, continue down that path, that person doesn't know what they're doing. They don't
Yeah.
even see the harm. I would have a hard time calling that self-harm.
Yeah, yeah. Right. And like obviously like what self-harm is might be broadened. I tend to like use clinical words for clinical things. And so
Oh,
like
okay.
maybe this is an area where like I'm more mentioning this. Somebody mentioned in my comments of being like self-harm isn't just intentional self-injury. And I'm like, well, clinically it kind of is, right? Like there might be different intentions for why you're doing the self-harm, right? Like you might have somebody who like has autism who's like head banging. But it's usually a form of like distress relief. I'm not I'm not convinced that the individual who's having casual sex is doing it because she's like just trying to find distress relief, right? I presume it's like most people engaging in casual sex that they're looking for a good time. That's the main reason why a lot of people I think engage in casual sex is it's fun, right? You get to have multiple different sexual
Well,
experiences.
that's someone engaging with casual sex for like a positive reason. There are many who engage in casual sex because they are told that this is how you have fun, not because they've decided that this is fun. I
Yes.
don't think casual sex is for everybody, but
Yeah,
I
I would
think it
agree.
is painted very much like everyone should be interested in it.
And you're bad if you're not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're bad, you're not fun, you're maybe prude, stuck up, or oh, you're so religious, or I don't know.
Yeah. And so for
We're
me,
not
like
kind.
casual sex never something that I've done. I had early childhood trauma around sex specifically, so it's like casual,
Mhm.
like anything sexual was extremely difficult for me to like kind of get used to and get comfortable with, right? And so it's like absolutely. Luckily, I grew up in like a prudy Christian culture, so I didn't get shamed for being a prude because it was viewed as like a moral thing, which I think is also an issue. Until like kind of I went to like secular settings where they're like, oh, like you just don't sleep around. And it was like, oh, you're just kind of a naive child when it comes to sex. And in fairness, back then, I would agree. I just was a naive child when it comes to sex.
Uh-huh.
But I'm glad I didn't get convinced out because when I first started like engaging sexually with my boyfriend, who's now my husband, like, holy shit, that would have been a terrible experience to have with a casual sex partner. Like, I don't think casual sex partners want to deal with like panic attacks. That's probably not a super fun time for them, you know?
Yeah, probably not.
Yeah, no, and that's a setting where I'm like, absolutely. I'm so glad that I stayed prudy and like religious enough for long enough that I didn't kind of get into like
Mhm.
casual sex because I for sure would have had a very bad time with it. It would have not been a good situation, and it would have left my partners in really bad situations potentially as well.
Yeah. I agree. And I think this is also one of the concerns that was raised, like accidental rape or something like that.
Yes.
That can lead into it, you not being able to establish or reassert your boundaries can lead somebody to violate you in a way that they potentially would have stopped had you been able to voice your concern or had they known that there was a discomfort.
Yeah.
Like whenever I think about that, and some of the excuses that not excuses, the reasons that people give for why women will freeze up, or they just sound so unhealthy to me that I don't know why we want to crutch onto them.
Right.
This idea that the man is bigger than you, he has a power over you. How if you ever say anything, you will get
fuck yes,
the shit beaten out of you and raped. And I'm just like, wait, so my husband, if he accidentally starts poking at the wrong hole, I'm just supposed to be cool with anal now because I don't know, he might rape me?
Yeah, it's like the most the best advice to give somebody to be like, here's how to get sexually assaulted really easily. It's to like never ever state things. And right, and there's this, and I blame true crime. I'm sure it's not just true crime, but like
I agree.
True crime, especially like a lot of popular true crime. I don't know what it is, but there's men that are into true crime. There's a lot of women into true crime, which is like weird.
Reinforces that fear of the world for us.
Yes, right. And
it's such a scary world out there, women, and at any corner you will be gotten.
Right. When the reality is like most sexual assault happens when both the victim and perpetrator are under the influence of drugs, right? Most sexual assaults happen by a partner. Often somebody that they know well, decently well sometimes. A lot of sexual assault occurs in situations where implied consent was assumed by one party and the other party did not feel like they gave it, right? So there's lots of blurry consent issues that happen with it. And it's concerning to me because if you have sex one time and you don't know that you have a freeze response, I totally have grace, and holy fuck, that sucks. That's horrible. And you should definitely go seek professional help for why the fuck that happened. Because that is a really intense response to like fully freeze, right? Some people talk about like, it's just like too awkward to say things. And I'm like, I don't know, like that, like that's a situation where I'm like, if it's too awkward to tell somebody like, hey, don't put it in that hole, I don't know, probably shouldn't be having casual sex. Where in casual sex encounters, particularly if you have a hard time with boundaries already, like saying don't put it in that hole, you're probably not as good at communicating what you do and don't want anyways. So it's not like it's going to be a long-term, right? Long-term partners, there's a lot of implied shit that goes on because you just get each other, right?
And the problem with this is like that's solid fucking advice, and we are allowed to give advice like that everywhere except for in sex.
Yeah.
Except with sex. If you are somebody who is incapable of saying no, if you're a people pleaser, any of these issues, we probably would tell you, hey, don't carry cash around with you, because whenever you walk out of the supermarket, somebody asks for money, you're just going to take the cash in your pocket and you're going to give it to them. Eventually you'll have like no money. Every time you go to the fucking supermarket, you're going to say yes to donate this. Like we tell people when they should say no, when they should, how to like curb these behaviors, how to not get taken advantage of, all of that shit until sex comes up.
Right. And then the like reason given is like, well, they could turn around and murder you. And I'm like, look, like so here's the thing. If we have this big group of men that are all kind of pushy, right? Probably say we have 100 men that are really pushy with sex. And let's be fair, we should probably be educating men. It's 2022, to be honest. Like, I don't know if there's as much need for pushiness unless I think somebody explicitly says. I think with like the rates of sexual assault, we should probably dial down on teaching men to be really pushy with sex, right?
Yeah.
So it was kind of sold as like this sexy tension building thing. And I can get it, right? Like there's a certain level, like I enjoy a certain level of pushiness from my long-term partner. I probably wouldn't enjoy that from somebody else, but I can get it. There's kind of this tension to like the pushiness and stuff. But the risk reward, especially with casual sex, to me is just so obviously like imbalanced of like, you don't want to be pushy and have a girl have a fucking freeze response, right? But of the men who are pushy, say we have 100 men who are pushy, maybe one of them is going to be a man that if you say no to something, he's going to fucking pin you down and assault you. Maybe one. Unlikely even the 100 men that you're seeing, right? And yet there's this risk reward of if you tell most pushy men, no, I'm not interested, or even if you just give a really easy cop out of being like, I need to go to the bathroom, right? So you can kind of get out of there and decompress yourself. which is like a really, really barely even boundary. It's just like getting you out of the situation that you're uncomfortable in. Most men, that will be enough to stop things, right? And if you
Hmm.
don't voice that, you
De-escalate.
literally, yeah, you literally might be in a situation of sexual assault, which is really scary, right? Like this risk trade-off. And it's not to say you're a bad woman for getting sexually assaulted. Like nobody's fucking saying that, at least not anymore, right? Like maybe a couple of
No,
like old boomers
yeah.
are saying that shit, but fuck old boomers saying that shit. Like they're fucking bastards. Don't say things like
I
that.
mean, just over the past 2 weeks, no one has fucking said that. There are a lot of people who I don't know if it's brain damage or something. I think long COVID has maybe some effects that happen sooner than later, but a lot of people fucking heard that, and that was never said,
Yeah.
never.
No.
But for me, that's a fucking trauma response. You are triggered by the discourse, and you're hearing shit that never was said.
Yeah.
But on top of that, something that you said before, uh, between men and women, having this, okay? Because it really sucks that we have to go back and forth and be like, oh, and also men, we shouldn't tell them that, and we should tell them this, and you should no longer have this type of pushy sex. I feel like a good thing to set everyone up for success is to just remove like the romantic aspect of like having sex with someone for the first time. Like for the first 5, 6 times. If you look at sex like any other sport or exercise, you should suck when it first happens. And not just the first time you have sex, not like the virgin fucking sex. Anytime you first encounter a new partner, it should suck. You should really work at it. You should study. You should do your homework, ask questions.
Yeah.
Get the study guide or something like that.
Oh,
Every
okay.
vagina is shaped different.
I'm
Every
understanding what you're
penis,
saying now. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I
every
wasn't quite sure your
penis
angle
has.
at this, but I understand you
Oh,
know. Yeah.
yeah. Every penis has a shape that's different, and
Here's what
um,
foreskin looks like, just in case you're in America.
yeah,
And most men aren't. I know in America, men in Canada, it's very different. Actually, it's about 50-50, but I know in America, most men are circumcised.
yes, they are.
Yeah.
I feel like that adds to the pressure of making sex like worth it in the moment or something like that. Like,
Mhm.
I'm going to push to get the most out of this because I have this idea of what our first time together should be like.
Yes.
And a woman, it's like, I don't want to say anything. I don't want to ruin this. This is supposed to be a really hot moment, and talking might make it worse. Just if we get that the fuck out of here, and really get comfortable at having an uncomfortable time the first couple times we have sex with someone, and really build up the trust and the communication that should exist there, to just like, go with your intuition on what you think your partner would like, because you've discussed it so much with them, because you've learned their body, and because their angles and shit like that. Like, I feel like that's a better way we can set people up for success in casual sex, and even sex within their relationships.
Do you think that all romanticism should be removed around sex? Because I'm not a romantic type, but I have a couple of friends who are like very romantic types. And I think about them and I'm like, they'd be so sad if all romantic. And I certainly understand what you're saying about like education and what we're telling people to do, right? Like we definitely need to demystify
I
sex at an educational level. Like it's so cringe. Is there a way to
I think
maintain romanticism at all? Or what do you think?
I think if it is the first time that you're having sex with someone, it should absolutely be removed. I think that's
Mhm.
so unrealistic. And I think that that's what paints like that adds to the fantastical view of what sex can be if you're doing it for intimacy and um for like bonding with somebody, and that compounds onto that.
Mm.
Like anytime that we've seen like The Notebook or any of these fucking chick flick movies and TV shows where they just saw each other across the room at the bar, and he was like a bit of a jerk and she was like, "Oh, but you're kind of cute." And they go home and they just like know each other's bodies, and it works out perfectly. It that is ridiculous.
Yeah, it's kind of because what I hear is I think that there's an element of saying it is the case that when you have sex with somebody, it's intimate and it's bonding. Like obviously, but
Mhm.
the idea that it's going to be like this, it's like the first kiss myth, right? It'd be like, first kiss is going to be so amazing, it's so exciting, and all these things. And then your first kiss is fucking trash always because nobody's good at kissing.
Always.
And they like clang your teeth and stuff like that, right? So
And
I definitely get what you're saying. And then
and
the
it's
also
it's
piece
not
of,
even. Oh, no, I'm sorry, go ahead.
no, go ahead.
I was going to say, and it's not because it never fucking lands the first time. And I think that is the problem here is there's always going to be this one moment, this one person or this one instance or this one vacation you went on where it was just fucking magical fireworks at the start. And it's so unrealistic and it's so rare, but that's the foundation for a lot of people's inspiration for making these movies, making this TV show, sharing this story, writing this song. And so we're all taught this rare, this romantic, this almost unattainable version of intimacy that we are then like looking at our regular life and applying it to every individual we ever encounter. And it is fucking us in
Yeah.
not a good way.
Yeah. And I think, yeah, no, that's it. That's interesting. Because it leans to like the whole issue of like how much we've romanticized relationships too, and like kind of what they look like, particularly with like rom-coms, which I think actually really fuck up women when it comes to navigating relationships. Where again, it's like men pursue, and it's like in these most rom-coms when you like look at the way that like the female protagonist engages with the male kind of love interest. I'm kind of like, honestly, that guy should dip. Like, you're kind of being shitty. And like, it's cool that he doesn't dip. Like, man, what a fucking like 10 out of 10 situation. But to expect that that's regular engagement, that men should just like pursue, you can be kind of shit to them, they'll just continue to pursue, and like all these things, I think leads to a lot of really, really deeply unhappy relationships, right? Where like a lot of times the men who are willing to do that to such an extent often engage in like really unhealthy obsessional relationships with the female that they end up like getting committed to. We end up with like relationships where like women get really creeped out and like harassed by men because they're like pursue, and it's like, stop fucking pursuing. Like, I'm not interested, right? And we end up with this relationship as well where like women are just like these, again, prizes to be won by like relentless effort. And that's like, that's not what a human adult is. It's a prize to be won with relentless effort. Again, it's like not the way that I want women to be regarded.
And I feel like the movie thing is or the stories that we hear, the stories that we watch, the very sexy romantic songs that we listen to, all of this, we know this is like a romanticized version of it. This is a Hollywood version of it. This is a script. This isn't reality. We all know that, but it fucking still lives in our head. It's like telling somebody, "Hey, don't compare your life to someone else on Instagram, someone else on social media. They're going to post the highlight of their life. You're not going to see the low points." And so you're taking your ups and downs and you're only comparing that to someone's ups. And that sets you up for disappointment, sets you up for failure. And while we have that separation and that knowledge about the media that we consume and these stories that we consume, it lives in the back of our head regardless.
Oh yeah.
In all of our heads. And we've all agreed, yeah, we're going to hold each other to this standard no matter what.
Yeah. I actually, it's interesting. So it's something I've had to, like, because I was never big into rom-coms ever. Like I said, I'm a very like aromantic person. And so I was kind of shocked when I realized like I had bought into certain like weird mythos around like particularly like men being like highly stoic. Not so much because I like expect my partner to be stoic, because I was pretty okay with like my husband crying, having all his fifis and stuff like that. That was totally fine with me, unless I had feelings too. Then mine needed to come first. And it was this like really pernicious, sinister little thing that I didn't even realize where it came from. But it came from kind of this like inherent assumption that like, yes, men have feelings. I had done enough work to be like, of course men have feelings. Of course they can express their feelings. Like, no shit. But I hadn't done enough work to say they can actually be completely equal to mine. Like, just because I'm woman doesn't mean that my feelings need to come first, or that he needs to deal with mine at all in this situation. And that was especially tough for me to have to learn in situations where we're having a fight because he's upset about me at me about something and I get offended by what he's upset by, right? Because in that moment, now I'm like, well, now I'm offended. So I know you're offended. That's why you're talking to me. Your feelings are hurt, but now my feelings are hurt. So my feelings come first now and yours come second. We need to deal with my hurt feelings. Then we can get back to yours. And I had to like do this analysis of being like, holy shit. If my best friend, my maid of honor, if this exact situation happened with her, I would never do that. Like I'd be like, oh, she's offended and hurt. Let's get through and work through all of her feelings first. And then afterwards, it can be like, hey, this is why this sucked for me. It wouldn't even be a question for me. And I was like, oh, fuck. That's not great. And it was really damaging my relationship. Like me and my husband had a really like tense relationship for a while. Not solely because of that, but in large part because of that, for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that can kind of suck. Like toxic femininity in a way.
Yep. Yeah. Which I think like it just feels like our culture's not really ready to address it. To be honest, it feels like our culture's not really ready to address any of it. And you know, a lot of people when you talk about toxic masculinity, toxic femininity, they're like, well, can't we just do away with the genders associated with it? And I'm like, maybe, but it's not descriptively true yet. Like the gender norms still exist within our society, whether we agree with their existence or not, they still are there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's not to say that like every woman doesn't want to be that type of woman. Like as much as I want to be this type of woman, this blunt, whatever, some people take me as a bitch. Like as much as this is how I want to be. I don't shame the women who want to be like coddlers. There's no kind way of saying that like you're a coddler or that you're like an infantilizer. But overall, like there's a space for you. There's definitely people who need that response, who need that help, that sort of support. Removing stereotypes in a way, as much as I don't want to be shamed for being the type of woman I am, I don't want to shame the type of women who do fit that stereotype and love it. It's like when I talk about open relationships and stuff, like I'm pretty cautious to shit on monogamy. Like that's not the goal. This is like the relationship style that I like.
Mm-hmm.
But I all the way respect people who still choose monogamy. You know?
Yeah, absolutely. Interesting. I was just thinking, one thing that I kind of thought of right away was basically, as you were kind of talking about that, was you were saying like, I totally want to make space for people who coddle. And I think an actual toxically feminine trait that nobody really wants to look at is enabling. I think women are broadly tend to be more likely to enable. Of course, in my view, so when I say toxic masculinity and femininity, I don't know what your view of this, but I view it as like these broad, descriptively true. They tend to more often be women, but I think men can engage in toxically feminine behaviors, and I think women can engage in masculine behaviors. That's just my preview. I don't know what you feel about that. It's not really important, but I find a lot of women. See, I have an issue with enabling, which is maybe because I don't know if you'll feel like surprised by that because I do like the nicey nice. I think compassion of women is really good. I think enabling is just as toxic and harmful to people as being a tyrannical abuser. I think it is just as
How
bad.
do you decide
in the grave?
How do you decide what's enabling? Like where do you draw that line from somebody who's just being nice and being supportive, like giving blanket support, and like at what point are you like, okay, you're enabling now?
Yeah, that's a good question. And it's something I have to deal with in addiction, specifically the field addiction a lot, right? Because I have to engage in compassion with them necessarily, but I can't enable them because that could put them in the grave, literally. And I've seen it happen a lot, actually, more often from enabling. Although you could argue like tyrannical abuse and trauma also puts people in the grave. So how do I draw the line? I really like to go back to my catchphrase really is, it's understandable. It doesn't make it excusable. And so typically with my clients, that's why I say I'm fine with normalizing being a human, but being a human isn't an excuse to try to not be more, right? Humans fuck up. Humans can be kind of cowardly. Humans can be weak. Humans can be all sorts of things. I think that's deeply human. And then I think there's something beyond just being human where you're like intentionally like trying to be malevolent. And the way I engage with like people who are actually trying to just be like fucking bad people and they're trying to like destroy the world is totally different. I don't do nicey nice with that shit at all. Because that's fucking garbage, right? So how I deal with it is normalizing being like, so if I've got a client who wants me to enable them. So I had a client, for example, newborn, they had a pretty serious meth addiction. The baby was born addicted to meth, lots of really, really bad issues. She was able to keep the baby because she was intaken into her facility where I was working at a long-term women's treatment center. Halfway through, it sounds like you have drug experience, so you probably personally know when you're in the midst of addiction, sometimes you try to jump out of rehab way sooner than you need to, and you kind of convince yourself into all the reasons why it's a good idea. And so I had this client trying to convince me basically why it was a really good idea for her to discharge herself and her like infant baby basically into homelessness because she was mad at the rehab program. So in that situation, right, I do the compassion of being like, it is totally understandable why you're over this shit, why you're exhausted. Rehab is fucking hard. And it's super understandable that you're in this position, but I need you to know if you do that, I have to call CFS because we cannot discharge infants into homelessness. We can't do it. I will call CFS with you, but you can't do it, right? So that would be the line I would draw, being like, I'm willing to have compassion for you, but I'm not going to bail you out from the consequences of your decisions. I'm not going to do that, and I'm not going to okay it and say, you don't deserve that natural consequence or like anything like that. So that's kind of how I try to navigate it, of like enabling really comes into when you bail people out of their consequences.
I'm going to challenge you here a bit.
Sure.
Because now we're talking about enabling from a position where you have a power and an authority that you are supposed to exercise. So what you're defining as like an enabler, it's very clear what people expect out of you as like a healthcare provider, a mental health care provider.
Yeah.
When we're just talking about like an average person who's maybe interacting or commenting on somebody's trauma, who doesn't have like, society doesn't have the expectation that they're going to challenge them or anything like that. Like, at what point do you consider somebody who just says, hey, I'm so sorry this happened to you? Stealthing is never okay. Like, at what point do you just take those sort of responses and think, enabler?
So I would say, if I look at the conversation you had with Destiny and them all, I would say the people who were opposing to you were engaging in enabling behavior. Because they just wanted to say, that sucks, I'm sorry, you're the victim. And they didn't want to say, to be honest, educationally, here's how we correct these types of situations, right? It's understandable, but that doesn't make it excusable. And it doesn't make it something that we should continue to repeat.
Okay.
Yeah, so I would say,
like, I think I'm pretty close with you.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm pretty close to you. I would say just having that message of, hey, I'm so sorry this happened to you. This is never okay. Like, I don't think that makes an enabler.
Right.
That's just sort of like an empath,
Just being
super nice person.
And
yeah,
it does suck.
compassionate.
Like, of course you feel bad. It sucks, right?
Yeah.
Still,
but when that person is then like fighting with the people who are just like giving reasonable advice, and they're like, hey, don't give advice, it's just a bad thing that happened, then yeah, I would probably go, I'm with you, that when you take that fight, you are making an active choice to be an enabler.
Yes, I would say so as well. Because you're saying, don't you dare fucking teach women how to keep themselves safer. Don't you dare do that, right? And we can have the conversation of like, is it right on the Twitter space? It's so like gray because it's like, why would you post that shit on Twitter? You probably shouldn't. But then it's like, when you post things on public, you don't necessarily expect like one of the biggest Twitch streamers to retweet it and stuff like that. So there's like kind of these, I don't believe that. These like varying things. In general, I would recommend people don't post like intimate things that they don't want people to respond to negatively. I would never share really personal experiences like that on social media.
Yeah. I also
I just don't know what the social contract is around social media. It's not clear to me.
Well, I'll make it clear, okay? As somewhat of a Twitter expert, I have had a Twitter account for over a year now, so I know a thing or two about it. The goal is to have your tweets seen and interacted with. The goal is not to just like yell into like the metaverse or whatever we're calling it. The goal is to be seen, where it's like
It's not like
yelling into
Facebook.
the abyss. Yeah. Well, no, it's similar to Facebook. You're posting and you're hoping that somebody sees it. This isn't like a private diary, otherwise you would just write in a notebook.
Right. I would
Like
say
you understand that there's a social aspect to this media. And especially on Twitter, like the functions of quote tweeting and retweeting are huge on this platform, and that is a large goal for people to get followers, to get engagement, to be seen, to be heard. And I think anybody who is engaging with social media to be private, they've either been led astray or they are like
they're
low
negligent.
IQ.
I would say they're negligent.
I would say they're retarded.
That's fair. I don't know if I'd say they're retarded. I would say like they're obviously being negligent. It seems like negligence is potentially a pattern. My issue mainly with social media is it a natural consequence to potentially get like mocked and harassed at like a potentially like national level for a dumb fuck post that you made? I don't know if it is. It might be a natural consequence on social media, but then maybe social media should figure something out to offset that, because before social media existed, you'd say some dumb shit like that and some people be like, oh, that really sucks, and then other people be like, yeah, but it's happening to you a lot, so that's weird, right? That would happen in a normal social exchange. The problem is that on social media it's magnified by like 200 times.
I feel like everything in our life has been magnified.
Yeah, but like, I don't think that's good.
No, but I mean like just over time. We went from like small villages to small towns to big cities to classrooms the size of 5 people to 20 people. Like I feel like as generations move on and like progress, like the things that were scary back then are no longer scary now, and there's new things to be scared of, and we're just constantly telling people how, oh, this is so different for you now, this is intense. Like it's probably not intense for somebody who grew up with Twitter. Like I feel like as older people that maybe were more like, we can't fathom what it's like to grow up in an age where like social media was just always there. And we're like, holy shit, in high school, like, I really had to think about sticks and stones may break my bones. Like, I don't know how you're dealing with 1,000 people on Twitter engaging with you. I imagine half of the people that are younger that engage in Twitter and like social media discourse, you can't actually think like 1,000 people liking your tweets is like 1,000 real people like liking you. There's got to be some sort of like removal there like dissociation there.
Yeah, I'm not convinced that our psychological system has evolved nearly as quickly as our like social changes have. And so I wouldn't say that necessarily somebody who connects 1,000 likes to 1,000 people liking me, I don't think it's that directly, but it is 1,000 reinforcements for a behavior, right? And I guess my concern with that particular like young lady is, she's an adult. I think about kids on social media who say dumb shit and then they get like publicly like mocked and harassed, and it's like, is it a natural consequence? Kind of. Is it magnified? Absolutely. Is there like actual like emotional
notice?
I think they do. I think like the evidence about like social media and the magnification and the impact on mental health seems pretty obvious to me. And I don't think our psychological system is actually equipped to deal with all of that extra onboarding information. And it scares me for teens because teens say the dumbest fucking shit. They make racist jokes, right? They make terrible lines. And like the reality of like Twitter is like, if you're an adult posting on Twitter, I hold you to a little bit more accountability. But when I watch this girl's exchange, I feel bad for the girl because it sucks. Like it just sucks. It does feel like a bit of a natural consequence. I don't know how old she is, but then I think about what if she was like 14, And it obviously, hopefully she's 14, she's not being stealthed like multiple times, but it's a similar situation where a
Yeah.
14-year-old is posting some sort of like trauma dump online and then getting roasted for it. And I'm like, holy shit. Like, I don't want kids having to be accountable for like what we maybe call like natural consequences of the immensity that is social media. I don't think that their systems are well equipped. I don't even know if adults are super well equipped to deal with it.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm holding off holding off my judgment on that one. I feel like I have heard for like a long time that um I understand the unrealistic beauty standards that can be applied via like the filter usage and stuff like that with social media. I don't know if I'm like ready to jump on board with just the sheer number of people who can engage with you on social media, if that is supposed to be something to be super super fucking shocked and anxious and like guarded for, or if I can like maybe compare it to someone, you know, being in school and getting teased in class, or maybe the entire school finds out about something embarrassing. And like, if these are just like, if I can compare these two, and that for somebody who grew up in an age of social media, that maybe there's not really much of a distinction between like your Twitter sphere, you taking an L in like the Twitter sphere, and maybe you being the butt of a joke for like your entire school. I think these are just like extreme embarrassing moments to happen on like such a large scale. I don't think everyone experiences that, but I think more a good handful of people have experienced like being shamed or being ridiculed like in front of the whole school, or everyone found out something super embarrassing. I'm not sure if there would be like a huge difference
Do you think if
between
you're,
the two.
yeah, say you're shamed and ridiculed by a whole school, do you think it's reasonable for that individual, especially if like it doesn't seem to be going away, for that individual to switch schools?
Oh yeah, no, I think you can like have a bad response to it. I
Mm-hmm.
just don't know if there's like a, if growing up with social media, if I view it as like worse than
Yeah,
kind of
my
shit.
issue with social media is you can't switch schools and let the bullying die down. The most you can do is delete it, like delete
Well,
your account.
yeah, so I don't think everyone had the privilege of like switching
Double tap
schools.
like me.
So if you
Yeah,
are,
in American system, so in Canadian system, you can fucking go anywhere you want. Doesn't matter. You could drive
oh,
7 hours to school. So that's fair with the American system. I don't fully understand your guys' education system.
okay. Like I think you can sort of recreate yourself on the internet. I think a lot of people do that. It's probably why their VTubers are really fucking popular. Um but I think generally most people should learn how to go through it and hopefully like under that pressure sort of become a diamond.
Mm.
And I don't think everybody does, but I think some people do. I think most of us who are successful in our adulthood went through some sort of adversity like that. And I believe that more kids can come out of it if we don't paint it as something that they should be traumatized by. Like I just don't want to reinforce
Yes.
that trauma, like the idea that they can never come back from it. I
Yeah.
would rather be an example of, oh, did you say something racist when you were a kid? Yeah, me too. Whatever.
Right.
Like that. Just like I get how as an adult we can look at it and almost be horrified at the sheer magnitude of what we had experienced in high school happening to younger people on the internet. I completely understand that. But I would like for more of us to shut up about that and maybe see if it's actually something that should be like, if that shame should actually be magnified, or if maybe, you know, we go the other way and make it seem like it's not that big of a deal. Sort of show our mistakes and stuff like that, and help them get past it rather than, I don't know, try to fight future technology that really isn't going anywhere.
Yeah, it's definitely not going anywhere. I think like we can.
Oh, you're muted.
Am I?
Or hold on, it might be me. 1 second.
No worries.
Hello? Hello?
Hey.
Hello?
Hi, can you hear me now?
Okay, I can hear you now. It was me.
Perfect. Yeah. So, interesting stat. So, about like trauma, for example, there's kind of this 25-50-25 separation that we see. So, if say somebody's exposed to an equal traumatic or distressing, we'd call it a distressing event. Because in general, I agree with you about like the only person who gets to label it trauma is actually the individual. I think it's really bad to tell people you had trauma. I think it's much more like important for an individual to be like, hey, I think this was traumatic for me. That's way more
Hmm.
informative. And yeah, I would agree. There's actually evidence for what you're saying of when we tell people, hey, this thing was really traumatic, and they don't know if they think it's traumatic yet, it's actually more likely to do more harm to them than good. So I think you're picking up, like, I think I can agree with you on that thing. The thing I might like push back on a little bit is the 25-50-25. So if we look at so this study came out of in part like from there was one study on Hurricane Katrina that kind of looked at basically a whole bunch of people exposed to a very similar event. Obviously there's going to be differences within it, but broadly everyone is exposed to a natural disaster, right? That caused lots of people to be trapped. What we saw was 25%, not always, but on average about 25%, these are really simple reductions, might develop PTSD. 50% are going to process it, they're going to go back to normal, right? They're going to go right back to baseline within a couple of months. 25% experience something called post-traumatic growth, where they actually become more resilient. They kind of become that diamond as a result of the distressing event.
Hmm.
What I don't want to do with social media is leave behind the bottom 25%, particularly if it happens to be the case that social media and like every single time somebody like squawks at you at on like social media does feel like a person in real life squawking at you. It's the same number of like negative events amplified because it's now national, right? So it's like it's not just like a high school all bullying you. It's like 10, like 100 high schools all fucking hating you. And constantly making comments when you pass them by in the locker and stuff like that. That's what I'm concerned about, basically.
Yeah. Okay, but I think like the sheer number of people that they interact with is probably it's probably something more shocking to us because we just went from being criticized or viewed in a singular high school. Um like I know my parents were shocked for me because of the number of people in my high school because it was a lot larger than like the number of people that they went to high school for.
Mhm.
So anything bullying wise there, it seemed like, you know, tenfold like over because I don't know. That's just how it's been progressing.
Mhm.
As for the 25 who you're a therapist, right? Or no,
I'm
not
a
you
licensed
specific.
addictions counselor. I'm not a psychologist.
Well, I just feel like we were probably removing a lot of jobs if we remove the patients for therapists who need to help people with PTSD. I don't know. I think there's always going to be failures. There's always going to be people who aren't strong enough. I think we can help those people.
Mhm.
Um, I'm not sure if we can completely remove
No, we
like
can't.
the amount of people who might not be able to come out of adversity like that.
Right. We can't. We definitely can't, which is why we have supports, right? The kid who switches
Hmm.
schools should probably also get some therapy too, right? To process the
Yeah.
fact that they got bullied out of a school. My concern is with social media, what if they can't leave the school, right? What if social media is the situation where they can't leave the school? Should we impose something, even culturally, to navigate that?
I think culturally we should do something. And I think that's getting away from cancel culture. This
Mhm.
idea that what you do on the internet is something that can live with you forever and you can never grow from it and you have to
Yeah.
apologize for it or revisit it like year after year after year.
Yeah.
That's probably a toxicity that we need to cut out and that probably starts like from the top. It's our own media that like really reinforces cancel culture. Um
Yeah. It
we're
allows it.
taught yeah, we're taught to be offended by like decades past.
Right.
Um, so yeah, I would agree with you there that there's definitely things that we can do to just make it a little bit better and a less toxic.
Yeah. And so I guess that's my question with this like whole stealthing text situation is like what is something, because I think like there's a certain level of natural consequence of like you put it out there on public social media, like You're going to get backlash sometimes, right? How do we go from not enabling to compassion? But again, how do we not go from, because I think on the other side of that spectrum, there's accountability and responsibility. And then there's kind of like, I don't want to say like abuse, but like shaming, like toxic levels of shaming, right? You could maybe call it abuse. I don't think anyone is abusing her necessarily. I think they were harassing potentially. So whatever label you want to give the like toxic side of responsibility.
Wait, what was the question?
Okay,
Sorry.
so we kind of talked about how like there's this end of the spectrum that's got like compassion, which is like a healthy thing. We should keep that. And then it feels like to me the like dark side of compassion, if compassion goes too far, for example, would be enabling, right? Too much compassion with no responsibility often turns into enabling. On the other side, if you have responsibility, that's great. Responsibility is healthy. If that goes uncontrolled, if there's not enough compassion to pull it back, it goes into some other territory, which we could call shaming. I don't like the word shaming either, because I think there's a time and place to like shame people. So whatever language, stigmatizing maybe, or like maybe we can just use abuse for simplicity. I don't think it's quite abuse, but like, you know, responsibility goes into like something toxic. Because it's not abuse.
Online engagement is not abuse, yeah.
Yeah, but like it's something, right? Like I'm just saying, if we've got compassion and enabling on this side, how do we prevent from responsibility into kind of like harassment and like toxic stigmatization?
So social media has tools when you feel like you are under threat. If you feel like you're being harassed, there is the private your account tool. There is the log the fuck off tool, the close your eyes tool, the block the account tool. Whenever we talk about getting yourself out of a dangerous situation, I feel like we're all the way reasonable until it comes to social media. Are you in an abusive situation at home? Is your husband hitting you or something like that? Like, get out of the situation. You do not try to fix your husband, right? The person who violates you, who hits you, that is not the person that you're going to get resolve from. And when you are engaging in social media and you feel like the people who are talking to you, typing to you, retweeting you, if you think that they mean you harm, that they are harassing you, do not reach out to them to be nicer people to you. That is irrational. That's illogical. So you can private your account. You can block people who harass you. You cannot share your personal details. If you don't like being judged by people for your personal life, you cannot share that. If you are sensitive about like how you are looking that day, you could not go on camera. But nobody wants to hear like ways in which they can prevent feeling disappointed and feeling antagonized. People don't want to talk about that. People feel like that's victim blamey, even though it's literally just setting you up for success in your engagement in social media. You don't know how to engage with this platform in a healthy way, and you are making it everyone else's responsibility, and that would be incorrect.
Right. And so I guess my question would be, because when we talk about like the enabling compassion piece, we're kind of talking about a macro social norm, right? We shouldn't enable people as a society with a norm of saying you're just a victim of whatever. Don't worry about it. People are just bad and you're not bad, right? That's the enabling piece, right? Which is social level reform essentially that we would need to do to offset enabling. And when we're talking about the respect into like whatever we call it, stigmatization or whatever, most of the recommendations you're mentioning are actually what the individual should be doing. And I'm wondering if there's something as like a social norm we can create. Because I think like it's good to talk about societal things and it's good to talk about individual things. Just like I think an individual can enable themselves with certain mindsets and they can also have responsibility with themselves. I think society can do these same things as well. They're just going to look a little bit different. So you don't enable somebody by saying you're just a victim and that's the end of the conversation. How do we, as like a social media culture, not stigmatize people?
When it comes to casual sex, we agreed that, hey, when we're giving advice, we don't have to just talk about rape is bad and rapist bad, and let's talk to the men who push boundaries. We can give reasonable advice to women to be able to engage with it where it's at. Like to engage with like society and with sex in where we are today with that. But in talking about Twitter, we do want to do the other thing, which is to focus in on the bad act, the bad behavior, and the bad people, and don't give users advice and tools to use to engage in the platform with where it's at.
Potentially. I'm totally up. I haven't made my mind up about this even a little bit. I've tossed around ideas of being like, should there be like a social norm where maybe actually we just require the social media system to kind of shut things down, and people who like don't know an individual just can't DM them, regardless of whether they've figured out how to change those settings. They just kind of block it to being like, all right, you've had about 100 DMs from randoms screaming at you. You probably had enough, and like kind of cut that off. Right, so we could have kind of a top level regulation to manage some of the stigmatization. We could have kind of that social norm of being like, hey, if people are going too far, just like turn it down. I guess mostly I'd like to say, I'd like to see like, and all of this is very idealistic, right? I recognize, hey, we're still going to have enablers and we're still going to have stigmatizers. And I'm not like trying to even suggest that the ideal is likely to happen anytime. But I think there might be a call to encourage people. So say in the case of Destiny, I think it would be going above and beyond, but there might be a time where he could say, okay, guys, she gets it. Cool it now. Right. And like, I don't know if that's even realistic to expect of somebody. I'm just trying to figure out, is there any way as like a social norm that we could protect somebody who doesn't know enough for themselves to fucking block people and shut things down on their own? Like they keep engaging, which I could see some mentally unwell people doing.
So there's a couple things wrong with that for me. First, it implies that like that Destiny's keeping tabs on what's happening with that person.
Yeah.
Like, because I quote tweet and say my piece on social media doesn't mean that I'm going to stay logged in and see what happens after the fact, or even that I should be invested in what happens after the fact, because there is the thing called the mute conversation. Like, I feel like Twitter has provided us so many tools to be able to disengage with this platform in a way where if you know that you don't want to further participate, you've got the tools. Block your account, private this thread, private your account, manage your DMs. You can prioritize what DMs you can receive and block other DMs from coming to you. Like these tools exist. And even though they exist, instead of like teaching people how to implement them and use them, turning towards, well, what can Destiny do to resolve this person's feelings is so ludicrous to me, because we wouldn't do that in any other regard. You wouldn't tell someone who feels like this person is abusing them or harassing them to turn around and negotiate with that person to get it to stop.
Yeah, I don't think Destiny was the abuser in any case. I think it's like,
oh, that's what a lot of people said, that because he's the larger account that he is at fault here. And if he's not at fault, why do we think that he should wave the white flag?
It's kind of like, if you have the power to mobilize the mob, you might have the power to stop it too. And so like I said, that might be an idealistic thing. But to be honest, it might be. But you can't say that. But you can't say that he mobilized the mob and that he's not at fault. These two things can't coexist. I'm not saying he's not at fault. I'm saying he's not an abuser. I feel like you did say that he's not at fault. But either way, I personally don't care. I don't find him to be the issue here. I find him to be engaging with the platform the way it's designed to be engaged with, the way that people find value in it. We can talk about whether Twitter is healthy for society or not. That's like that's a different conversation to have. But if we're going to talk about how to make Twitter like a safe space, like that's something to decide whether that's like Twitter's goal. Right. And like, I don't want to like have this be reduced down to like Destiny should be nicer, because I don't actually think that we just need to be nice in society. I don't think we're going to fix all problems, because there's actually a space for a certain level of like mild social shame. I'm basically trying to be like, is there any other strategy we can give people who maybe aren't wise enough to like get out of get out of school. Like for example, I'm thinking of situations. So I don't think it's this situation. I think like I don't actually know much details. I'm hoping she just privated her account and blocked people eventually. I have no idea.
Is she privated and then she's back on Twitter, at least the last time I saw. Back
Okay.
on it and saying that she was gonna have lots of casual sex that weekend.
Okay.
So
Yeah. Yeah. Whereas other individuals, I look at like what's that young girl? Because again, my main concern when it comes to social media is always going to be kids, right? Teens particularly, because they say stupid shit, and they're going to be more at risk for like being impacted. Because teen development at that age, it's really important what your peers think of you. And so if you're in this like exacerbated situation where you're getting even more negative peer feedback, I'm worried about that, particularly in cases. So we've got instances of like cyberbullying, where like okay, so say we're like, maybe Destiny doesn't, it's not up to Destiny. Like maybe the best practice of Destiny would be to like make one follow-up post being like, okay guys, that's enough. But it's not very realistic to expect of people. I totally agree. I think sometimes things might be best practice and they aren't actually realistic of what I expect. Which is why I'm saying like, sure, Destiny is like a little bit at fault, but like, I don't think fault makes him bad by any means. What
Okay.
about individuals like the cyberbullying? There's like a big case in BC where a girl was like followed regardless of basically what she did on social media. She tried everything and people were contacting her family, her new schoolmates, everything, just like relentlessly pursuing her to cyberbully until the point that she did eventually take her life and they were encouraging her to kill herself. I don't know if you ever heard about this. It's really big in Canada.
I haven't.
Okay, her name was like Amanda something. It was really terrible when you like watch actually the details of like what happened in the situation. Like it's just fucking tragic. Where like she actually did everything. She did all of the things that we're asking to, and it's like it's these cases that I want to be like, how do we create maybe a social norm for these fringe cases? Because holy fuck, I don't want another 15-year-old being cyberbullied, basically no matter where they go because their name was released, right? Like what fuck? Like holy shit. Don't want kids killing themselves because like they could just never live down their like social media. She like I think she like showed like a tit shot to somebody or something like that and just got like bullied relentlessly online and offline until she ended up dying by suicide.
That sounds awful. I feel like there's always gonna be like terrible stories like that. I'm not sure if there haven't been like, or if there don't continue to be steps taken to try to create like a better social atmosphere, a more understanding atmosphere, a more forgiving atmosphere, a technical future with more tools to disengage. And I think that some of those tools and some of those ideals that are signaled to us do contradict some of the profit incentives and the motivations of these corporations. Twitter specifically, I get into tech news a lot as well, and as much as Twitter is listening and giving tools for us to use to combat misinformation and combat like the negative aspects of social media, especially for mental health and especially for kids, and like beauty standards in general, they will do that and then in the next breath have a very, very ambitious goal of doubling their profit over like a 2-year period. So I don't know. As much as there are tools, I understand that there are incentives that maybe will make them less ambitious in achieving those goals.
Yeah, I think mostly I'm like, I wonder if we can instill a chill out bro culture of being like, at some point we're like, okay, they've had enough, like, because that often is like a natural experience that happens in like more healthy like school education settings where like perhaps a kid gets a little bit bullied because they're like, they do something that's not like socially we don't really approve of, whatever the behavior is, right? They're kind of like bossy, or they're like really, they like freak out at other kids, whatever it is. So we engage in a little bit of social shaming and being like, oh dude, like that's fucking weird. But in really healthy social milieu, I usually see at some point kind of this like mantra coming up of being like, okay, let's chill out, guys. They've had enough. We've told them that this is fucking weird. Let's just let them be now, right? And I guess I'm wondering, like, I wonder if there would be a way to, and again, I'm brainstorming. I'm not saying like this is what should happen and you're bad if you don't do this. I'm not saying that. I'm saying like these might be idealistic things, but I think like cultural norms shift all the time, and it could be something interesting to see of like a chill out bro of just being like, okay, like they've probably had enough. Like let's fuck off now, you know?
Okay. I think that would be cool. I
Yeah.
don't know. It sounds cool. It doesn't sound like it coincides with the purpose and the goal of what Twitter and Twitch are, which is like entertainment
Yeah.
platforms
Meeting, yeah.
where people are going there for entertainment, and
Yeah.
that would almost imply that people are entertained by peace. I don't know. That's unrealistic.
Yeah, it's going to be more that community piece, right? Because some people, I would say some people go to Twitter for entertainment, but I think they stay for community to some extent. Not all of them, but some of them do.
Maybe.
That's fair. Like I said, this I'm willing to be like, maybe this is too idealistic. I just think like obviously I am in favor of people like, yes, we should just be like, hey, people are being fucking dickheads to you online, block them. It's not that hard. I do it pretty often, right? If somebody's like constantly spamming me, like, can you sit on my face messages? I just block them. Like, it's not that hard. Like, it doesn't distress me. I'm just like, that's fucking weird, right? Obviously, if I have like 100 million people attacking me at once, that would probably stress me out. I'd probably private my page and just not touch social media for like a week or two till it dies down. Which is
but a lot of
probably
these
something we need to tell people to do.
Yeah, but then also people need to not exaggerate. Like sometimes you will literally have somebody who's maybe got 5 messages that is like challenging or adversarial, and they make it sound like it's the end of the world and this is a harassment campaign. It's
Yes.
5 messages, like
Block them, delete them. Yeah.
I don't know. We've almost on the flip side of that coin, we've given people the reins. Hey, this is a bad thing that's happened to you. And hey, be upset by any like amount of pushback, or be upset by people just disagreeing with you. If you don't get the constant fix of validation from Twitter, if you did not get your serotonin high from likes and retweets and follows, make that somebody's problem. Get it by being an asshole. Get it by being a cry bully. Just get it some way.
Yeah, I like, because it's more than being upset. Like, I think it's pretty human to be upset by people being mean to you. It's a whole other thing to like go on like an intense social media campaign about it, and be like claiming like trauma, right? Like I'm traumatized, and it's just like you should probably like honestly like delete your social media. Again, this isn't because it's good that people are harassing you to that extent. It's what can you do to protect yourself?
And it's not even just the person who might look like they are being online harassed. There are people who literally get up, and I think that they get off on, I don't know, being like the white knight for someone that they think is the bully, is being bullied for like the underdog. I saw so many of that. Oh my, like hundreds of people at least that saw this person and was like, hey, don't say this about people that you don't know, you can't possibly understand. And I will turn around and be like, do you know this person? None of us know this person.
Yeah.
As much as you don't like that I'm critical, I also don't like that you are infantilizing.
Yeah.
How do we meet in the middle?
Yeah. And there's like no space for.
No, because you are either parasocial one way or the other. There is no in between. The people who are in between have logged off.
Yeah.
They just don't care.
Yeah, they walk away, right? They've mastered the like walk away, bro, tactic. And I think that's the part where I'm trying to like navigate this, because I recognize that a lot of times the people who engage the most on social media are oftentimes the more mentally unwell people. So they're also the people that make the least rational choices and to be the most likely to be like actually harmed by things that most people wouldn't be affected by. And so I'm trying to be like, I want to hold space for that and not enable it at the same time.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
Yeah.
And I wish you the best of luck.
Yeah, that's fair. Who knows? Maybe I'll become embittered and 2 minutes, because I think it depends on like how long the conversation goes, right? Like with my TikTok, I'm like pretty
Hmm.
over it. I've been trying to like just talk to women about this idea that I call palatable assertiveness, which is just like how do you reject somebody in a way that like de-escalates and is kind, more or less. And
Hmm.
like holy shit, like the response you get is just like so, I guess, is so ridiculous that I'm just like I'm a little bit over it now, where I'm just like I just respond with like face palms and stuff like that, because it's just like I can't engage with you anymore. If you're just going to keep saying that
Oh,
I'm like pro rape and I want women to get assaulted on the street because I'm saying, hey, is there a way to say no and not be mean about it? Like just say no in a reasonable way. You don't even have to be nice about it. You could just be like, no, I'm not interested. Like that simple. But it seems like that's not possible. I don't
listen, I promise you, you're going to be just as disappointed on Twitch.
know.
There's a thing that happens here, which is you will have an argument. It will be insufferable. You will get your point across. You'll say all the correct things, and a lot of people will reward you for it. And then there will be a handful of people who are very much reserved to you just being a rape apologist and pick me. And it will feel insufferable for a moment. You'll get the positive reinforcement from the people who support you.
Yeah.
And then in 3 months, you will have the same debate as if it never happened before. And it just happens over and over and over again. There will be a new face. There will be the same arguments, the same people who conceded to you and then agree with you, but then decide, no, actually, you're the worst person.
Mhm.
And then it will be resolved. And then in 6 months, you'll have the same debate all over again. Everyone has amnesia. It might even happen 4 days later. I don't know. But this is what my life has been for the past year.
Yeah, that's fair. I guess I'm like, I'm willing to take on the challenge to see if it can be like different, not because I think I'm so special. I'm just kind
No,
of like maybe there's space for it now.
look, take it on. I would tell you to even get back on TikTok. Take it on, because as many times as this loops has only it only gets you better or
Mm,
makes you better. Fuck, I'm still not good with words, but listen, I was a lot worse a year ago.
right.
But it polishes your points. I think every time you might learn something a little bit different, learn something a little new, get challenged in a slightly new way. And overall, if your goal is to be like an advocate, this is like the best practice you can get.
Yeah, oh for sure. Yeah, which is why the main reason why I'm avoiding TikTok at this point is because of the lack of long form, where it's like I don't feel like
Mm.
things are getting evolved. I'm getting the exact same argument every single video because it's different people unrelated to the last one's commenting. And I can't do
Yeah.
long form, so I have to like post all these fucking caveats all the time. Of being like, obviously, I think rape is bad. Obviously, I think. Whereas in a long form conversation, I can quickly be like, obviously, rape is bad. Moving on, right? You can just do the caveat and then have the conversation.
I
So
think you will find that panels will remind you of TikTok.
a bit,
It
yes. I've been
will.
I've been on a few already.
Oh, okay. Well,
Yeah.
then you understand. You will feel like you only have like 1 minute to fucking say something, because then everyone else needs to fucking jump in. Um, but yeah, the one-on-one conversations will probably be a lot better.
Yeah. Or spicier, depending on how people feel.
Hmm.
I might get some
True.
spicy takes from this one, but probably not. I think sometimes people like if you're big enough, then they'll get mad at you. If you're small enough, they're just like, let's ignore and deplatform. So we'll see.
Hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. Um,
Well, I super appreciate the conversation.
yeah.
Um, I'm glad uh the viewers connected us. This was pretty fun.
Double tap like me.
Yeah. If you ever get invited to a panel and you need some backup, just give me a shout out and chat a little bit.
Okay, well, I'm antisocial, so I probably won't ever reach out, but you are very free to reach out to me.
Sounds good.
That's just so you know, I just won't reach
I mean,
out.
if you've
That's
given me
the
that
person I am.
consent, then that's
Mhm.
exactly what I'll do. I'll just be like, hey, I'm going to
Yes,
bug you again and get your position on this thing.
that's
Yeah.
perfect. I do like to be reached out to, so
Okay. Sweet. But yeah,
okay,
I appreciated the conversation and hopefully I can look forward to another one in the future.
yeah. Have a good one.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.
Oh my God, I wasn't expecting train space.